hopefully answer those questions for you. And if there's any questions that we can't answer right now, jot them down and we will get an answer back to you. All right. Okay, so we have to reach out to, let me send a text message out to Malik to make sure he joins. Because I know we have a tight agenda and we have a lot of brilliant folks that are on this call. So I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to talk, right? Again, my name is Richard Wallace. I am the founder of Equity and Transformation. I'm also a member of the Policy Table Leadership Team with the Movement for Black Lives. In June 2020, we answered the call from the Movement for Black Lives to establish an Illinois Breathe Act. If folks are not familiar, the Movement for Black Lives is a formation about 300 organizations from Black-led organizations from across the nation, organizing under what they call the Vision for Black Lives. So there's a Vision for Black Lives platform that you can find. Just Google search Vision for Black Lives, or Google search M4BL. You'll be able to find all that information. And so how we landed on the Breathe Act in the Movement for Black Lives is essentially there was a number of policies that came out under the framework of defund, divest, invest from policing in America. And none of them quite hit the mark, of what we were trying to describe. And so there was, through the leadership of folks like Gina from SE Justice and Ashley Woodward Henderson from Highlander Center, there was some curiosity amongst movement folks. So like, what would it look like for us to actually begin to draft policy that reflects the exact emotion that we're trying to convey in a moment, right? And what we landed on was a federal Breathe Act. And so you got to remember, this is during the Trump administration. It was like, what are the possibilities in this moment to pass this on a federal level? And then I think some curiosity also arose, like, what would it look like to begin to implement this framework on a state level? So we answered that call in Illinois. And I think that the answering of that call put in motion a new way of doing policy for the state of Illinois, and hopefully it could be replicated across the country. And it was I think the initial call, it was myself, Brendan Schiller, Sharon Mitchell, Amara might have been there, I'm not sure, Kadeen. And we had to answer the question, I think, as organizers of folks that have been doing this work, what can we do together that we can't do apart? And that called on folks trusting in ways that I haven't seen in my organizing history, leaning, language that essentially has been organized around individually for years, trusting that the Breathe Act could be something that they could include their language in our demands. And so what we were able to do is curate a robust set of policy demands. And then that language was then drafted by the brilliant Dominique, who spoke on the last teach-in. And if you haven't met Dominique or don't know what her work or her involvement is in the Breathe Act, we have a teach-in, and I think it was recorded. We can send out to folks. And so the Breathe Act, we focused on 4 core principles. One was creating systems of accountability and transparency around policing. 2 was demilitarizing and reducing police power and interaction. 3 was ending the carceral state and repairing criminal legal system harms. And 4 was redistributing resources to build healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities for all people. From that, and now I know people understand that was the scope, but it wasn't just bullet points on a piece of paper. This was drafted in a policy and the legalese into policy language. And what came from that ultimately changed history in the state of Illinois, right? Shout out to all of the groups, and I also want to highlight, none of this work, I wrote an op-ed and I said none of this work could have been done without the leadership of Black people historically in the state, right? I can remember when Laquan McDonald and Rekia Boyd were killed, and our movement formations were led by Charlene Carruthers and Paige Mays, and we were shutting down the expressway every year. That is part of this story. Going back even further, if you think about Benny Lee and the work that he's been doing around formerly incarcerated people and system impacted people, my mother, Reverend Doris Green, who's been working in the field for decades, Barbara Ransby, the list could go on and on, Martine Carville, just like folks that have been doing this work historically. That's the reason why we got here. This is a democracy, which means that the majority of the people had to be moved. And so I think the majority where people were moved through direct action, civil disobedience, Black people, brown people organizing in the city of Chicago and in the state of Illinois, saying enough is enough. And we got to a point where the legislators heard our call, and they activated in ways I think shocked all of us, right? I think most of us realized like, oh, we may get a few pieces in, this, that, and the other, but shout out to the elected officials. But then also, I think it's also important to name that progressive electeds also need progressive bases to hold them. You know what I mean? And in this moment, we still are waiting for the bill to be signed. Am I correct? Because I don't know if anything came out this morning. All right. and so we need that base to activate again to demand that this bill be signed, right? So I was going to go over a few points of few highlights within the policy that were also included in the Breathe Act. Starting with ending cash bail, which is the most important thing, which is resonating throughout the ecosystem. And shout out to the end cash bail. And I'm pretty sure Malik will be on shortly. Nicole, make sure you text him one more time. I sent him a text too. Make sure he jumps on the call and can join the panel. But essentially, that falls under the subject matter, criminal justice and sentencing reform. On or after 1/1/23, the requirement of posting monetary bail is abolished, except as provided in the following Uniform Criminal Extradition Act, the Driver's License Compact, and Non-Resident Violator Compact. So we will give you all a breakdown of the policy after the call as well. But just know that takes effect, and just highlight 2023. So that means if anything happens now, like up until that date, folks that are incarcerated or that are in jail and can't post cash bond will still be there. There are programs like Sherilyn Grace has the Chicago Bond Fund that you can contact if you have loved ones that are incarcerated and need to be released. And then there also are groups like the National Lawyers Guild that you can reach out to for your loved ones in the interim. And so we've been navigating that ourselves at Equity and Transformation and helping folks get out. And we were recently, had someone that was incarcerated that we had to bond out, and it was a seamless process. So reach out to the Chicago Bond Fund for support there. Other pieces that were also related to criminal justice reform is changes in drug penalties. Another piece is electronic monitoring modifications, non-arrestable offense modifications, truth and sentencing changes. I know I can't get in depth in all of these because of the time. Reclassification of misdemeanor, of mandatory minimums, rollback of the 3 strike sentences. I'm gonna keep going. As it relates to police accountability, there are some changes to investigation report requirements, mandatory special prosecutor for police-involved shootings and deaths, prohibited police devices, weapons, and practices. So that has everything to do with demilitarization. There's no need for police to have tanks. I think one of the most glaring experiences I had was on the west side of Chicago during the height of the uprisings. And there were tanks and I'm talking about little kids were walking across the street, and there were police officers out there with fully automatic rifles and riot formations, dump trucks all the way down Cicero Avenue, right? Blocking people so people couldn't leave out. They couldn't get into the city center. And there were tanks in the city. And it's something that you think about in movies, right? I was just watching Greenland last night. I fell asleep to it. But in Greenland, it was like this comet that was coming to Earth, and there were all of these tanks and air. And I was like, wow, I would have never, it makes sense in a situation where there's like an alien coming to the, you know what I mean? Like this, but you were using these tanks on the people who paid for them, right? Those are our tax dollars that were going into motion. So I think it's important that we look at this as if in the way that how are we taking agency over our tax dollars, over our votes, over the way we want to see society, right? So we're like, no, that doesn't make sense, right? Moving forward, there's changes in the use of force. So excessive force, and we can give a breakdown of that. Misconduct records, it adds provision that all records related to complaints, investigations, and adjudications of police misconduct must be permanently retained. Jurisdiction of independent investigators of officer-involved shootings. And I know these may be terms that y'all want some clarity on, so please add questions to the Q&A. There's also, I mean, I think when it comes to the framework of divest, invest, we're not just talking about what do we want to dismantle, we're also talking about what we want to rebuild, right? And I think that a lot of times what gets highlighted is the divestment pieces or the dismantling pieces, but they generally try, and they don't talk about the fact that we're also talking about there's something else we want to build in the replacement of this, right? And that generally is how a lot of anxiety is built in the community. Like, if there's no police, then what do we do? And I'm going to highlight one little story that we had. Equity and Transformation is a base building organization. So essentially our base has to agree to whatever measures we endorse, support, et cetera. It doesn't work the other way around. We don't just say, yeah, defund, and then the community's like, hell no. You know what I mean? Like, we actually had to build a process, right, to ensure that our community was supporting us. So that way that these are voters, this is democracy, these folks can enact their vote however they feel, right, in order to, if they're committed to this cause, right? So we put up a life-size petition on the wall off Madison and Springfield, and we had 100 or more really hard conversations with community about the framework. The petition said, should we defund the police and refund our communities, right? And then we collected over 100 and some odd signatures from residents in West Garfield Park who agreed that we should. They didn't agree immediately. Some of those conversations were like, well, what are we gonna do? And we're also talking about during a time where we had 700 murders in the city of Chicago in 2020, right? So there's a lot of either intra-community violence, but we're able to make the connection between this system has not worked, right? If it worked, then we wouldn't see these results, right? And so what we really need to do is begin to take agency over, like, what are the actual investments that are necessary? So in that line, there was a creation of economic opportunities to direct individuals from criminal behavior and invest in conflict resolution strategies, eliminating barriers to strong family units, invest in diversionary programs. And I think that we also, when I bring up these programs, we should also be on this call as moving people thinking about how do we begin to develop these programs as well and put our bid in. Because if we don't, then the same people who were organizing these institutions will be defining who will be managing these institutions when they are developed. So we also need to be part of the implementation process and stick with this for the long haul. And so those are some of the key points that I wanted to lift up on this call. And then I know that we'll have folks that are going to go in depth around each topic area that they played a part in, and hopefully some of the questions that you may be wrestling with, you'll be able to get answered through this process, right? So that is my piece, and I'm excited. I mean, you could be anywhere in the world right now, and you're here with us, and so that means something. It's Saturday morning. It's a snow day, so I figure folks really ain't got too much to do. You know what I mean? Like, it is snowing outside. But you could be, spending time with family. You could be eating breakfast right now, and you're here with us. So I appreciate you. Next up on the agenda, we have Brianna, who's gonna give us a little bit of grounding. Brianna's a member at Equity and Transformation, and really has lived the experience that I think the Breathe Act solves. So I wanted to give her space to kind of ground us in what that experience is, and then we can move forward. So without further ado, I'll pass it to Brianna.
Okay, hello everybody, good morning. Yes, my name is Brianna Sengis. I am a member with EAT. So I'm gonna just give you my backstory really quick. So I am 26 years young, birthday coming up in March, woo, woo, woo. I went off to a 4-year university, U of I in Champaign-Urbana. Pretty much couldn't afford it. I completed a year and a half. So that's what, 3 semesters, completed a year and a half. Boom, I owed money. Um, Depending on some people, thought it would have gotten paid, but one thing led to another. Uh, every month, didn't realize it was going up, interest going up, going up. I was trying to get back into community college, couldn't do anything, couldn't really do anything because I needed official transcript. So because I owe money to the U of I, it was all unofficial. So it was like I had to start over. For 5 years, since 2015, I've attempted to try to go back to school. I couldn't. So here I am, I was left to try to figure it out in the streets of Chicago. So that's where I got a job, ended up getting 2 jobs, couldn't stay at my mom's, had to get my own apartment. Well, I could have, but everybody was there. So it's like, okay, I need my own space. I'm gonna get into, I think I got into Malcolm X like the first semester, thanks to a counselor that wasn't paying attention. And he allowed me to take classes. So I was taking a class or 2 at Malcolm X with, ended up not being able to go back. That's when I found out that, you weren't supposed to take classes. Like, okay, started getting the second job. Things wasn't really working out because I had rent at that time. So it was like, okay, all of my time is going to school. All of my time is going to work. But, I got bus fare, and the minimum wage back then a couple years ago was like, what, $10? Bus fare was like was driving me crazy. I moved out south. It was terrible. It was crazy. Then I got a car, so that was another bill. Ended up starting to do stuff like ghetto Uber, and if you ask me what ghetto Uber is, same thing as Uber, except you call, I come. Depending on where you're going, $10, $15 if you're going across the city. But it became something that was a little scary because if I build a clientele, then it's like I'm picking up strangers. Then I started doing stuff like over the pandemic. Um, Doing Valentine's Day baskets, doing Sweetest Day baskets, something. And I'm like, oh, okay, taxes. They're gonna take. I'm 26 with no kids, so I noticed that they take more out of my check. So I'm like, okay, I don't work 80 hours at a call center job, and I'm only seeing like a very small portion of my check. I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? Okay, it's because I don't have any kids now. Like, okay, I don't want to go and get kids because I see people with children get a little bit, they can get the link. I tried getting link. I was only getting $24.52 at a point in time. So I'm like, okay, nothing will work. So that's when I started. I guess this is when you can say I joined the informal economy. It's doing stuff under the table, trying to make ends meet, without being taxed, stuff like that. During this pandemic, with the help of E, I was able to join the Freedom Fellowship Summer, Freedom Fellowship Fall. It taught me a lot. I gained a lot of knowledge. And even when that was over with, I attempted to still, just like I said, Sweetest Day baskets. Christmas is coming up, Anybody needs something? Just with my car, still doing ghetto Uber. And as I was learning more and more about each view and vision, when I learned about the Breathe Act, it was like, okay, I could get into this, like I like helping people. We did a coat drive one time where we were giving away coats, and I was like, oh, okay, let me post this and show everybody, like, this is what's going on. The Breathe Act, because it's something that, I I can relate to. Like, I have not been to jail or anything like that, but with family members, very close family members and loved ones having to go through that system and seeing the unfairness, I'm like, no, it's something, it has to change, So there's a part in there's a part in the Breathe Act.
You breaking up, Bree? We'll pause for a second before the.
Um, and that's another thing. Another part of the Breathe Act, the no cash bails. I have people calling me now because they see what I was doing on Facebook with showing people what each has to offer and what we were working for. They calling me as well, like, hey, does this is implemented now? Because they're telling me I got to pay $250,000, to get bonded out, and police ran up on them, and they were running, of course, because I'm sorry, I'm not a criminal, but if I see the police running toward me, I might just run. So I'm like, I understand why they ran, and next thing they told me that they were locked up because they had just got out of jail, and the police was saying that they had got a call saying that they were waving around guns. There's no evidence, but just he say, she say, and they have a $250,000 bond to this day, like right now, and it's just everything it weighs heavy, trying to go to school, it not working out, still wanting to go to school and still having that goal in life of wanting a bachelor's degree, wanting an associate's degree to have something behind me. But it's like, how can you do that if, school costs so much, um, and just having to come out here and face the world and just try to figure it out. And then the pandemic hitting, and this has been one of the worst times of my life. Like landlord is harassing and like just it's been terrible. But I look up and I thank God for an organization like EAT, because not only have I gained knowledge, but I'm gaining experience. Like right now, I'm nervous to be on this call, but when it comes down to speaking about something that I know, speaking about something that I've experienced, I don't need a pen and paper. At first I was gonna write a little paragraph. I don't know every point of the Breathe Act, but I'm familiarizing myself and being able to talk to people, and just having that one phone call about somebody asking me, oh, well, is it implemented now? And just knowing that there are some people out there that's looking for me and guidance, although I'm still looking for guidance. I'm, looking at my superiors, Richard, Nicole, Alonzo, I'm asking them questions, but it makes me feel good inside that even though I've been through all of this and I'm not exactly where I'm at in life where I want to be, I could still help somebody. I could still, even though I could pass out a coat, I could make the phone calls to the restaurants, like we want to do a food giveaway. Like, being involved in the Freedom Fellowship, it makes me feel like, okay, well, I am doing something. I may not have been able to finish school, which I that's something that I still intend to do, but that's just something that I just have to do when I get it all together. Like this work right here is something that I applaud. It's something that I'm grateful for. It's something that I'm proud of. It's something, that like I can say I did that. I was a part of that. This is history going on right now, and I'm just any little thing that I could do, whether it's making, like I said, making phone calls to restaurants, it's big to me. So, to be able to tell my story, is something like, okay, well, they're listening. There is going to be a change. It might not happen tomorrow. It might not happen, within the next hour, but there is change coming, so I'm grateful. I thank everybody on this panel, thank you for having me and being able to speak my truth and tell my side of my story. So thank you.
Thank you, Bree. And there's a lot of love coming for you from the panelists. So check the chat. Yeah, and
I
I think
almost teared up for a second. Hold on.
it's okay. Um, and so yeah, I think for Bree, and also want to say that Equity and Transformation is an organization that's led by formerly incarcerated people, myself included, right? And I think that is important because I've seen. I want us to be involved, people that are system impacted, people that have experiences, to be part of not just the advocacy work and the telling of the stories, but actually the constructing of the policies. that are part of the meeting with the legislators, the conversation and the implementation, right? I think it's super important because my comrade Mary Hook says that we are transformed through the work, right? I know a lot of brothers that were just like me that are still in county, that are still in one of the state prisons in Illinois, and all I can say is by the grace of God, there go I, right? Whatever God you believe in, higher power, whatever, ancestors, the living room couch, whatever it is that you got faith in, there go I, and I know that for me, it took the movement and being activated in the movement, and that saved my life, right? That was the difference between me be going back to jail. And I didn't got close to going back to jail, protesting and direct actions and all of that stuff and civil disobediences, but it was for something different. And so I'm grateful for movement, for transforming my life. And I think my goal at Equity and Transformation, our goal at Equity and Transformation is provide that transformation to as many people as we possibly can. We are not operating in scarcity, we're operating in abundance. There's enough freedom for us all. And so, Bree, I just want to say thank you for sharing your story. I didn't get any of the nervousness. All I got was like your passion for the work. So thank you for that. And so moving along, we have, like I said, we have some folks that are actually going to get into the weeds with us, right? Around what does this actually mean? A lot of people are hearing about in-cash bail. I want to shout out pretrial fairness folks, the in-cash bail, in-money bail folks, the folks that have been driving this work for years. And so I met Malik. Malik is a member of the Illinois Breathe Coalition. And I was like, how can we get Malik in, right? So Nicole really did the ask, and I'm just grateful that he was able to join the call. So Malik, the floor is yours. Really just talking about like what your involvement was in the Illinois, in the ending cash bond work, and how you see and how it's going to be implemented. Just kind of give folks the facts, the top lines as it relates to it, so folks have some clarity. So Malik,
sure. Thank you for having me, Rich. My name is Malik Alim. I'm the campaign coordinator for the Coalition to End Money Bond. So the Coalition to End Money Bond is a formation of 14 different organizations that are Cook County based, that have been doing the work of challenging the constitutionality of the money bond system, as well as trying to get state legislation passed to end the practice of charging people money for their freedom before they've been charged, before they've been convicted of a crime. And so we are kind of in a celebratory mode, but we're also looking forward to implementation because the Pretrial Fairness Act was part of the Black Caucus's criminal justice reform bill that passed earlier this year. And so what that means, particularly in terms of the pretrial fairness part, what that means is that we have effectively abolished money bond. We've become the first state in the union to completely abolish the use of money bond, effective January 2023. And what there's also other provisions as a part of the Pretrial Fairness Act, right? It doesn't just end money bond, it creates a whole different way of approaching how we look at if the decision of if a person should be put in a cage. Is obviously, a lot of us believe, including myself, that no one should be put in a cage. But we are moving towards abolition, and as such, this is a win in terms of how we make those decisions. And so a good way, I think a simple way to look at it is that effective in January 2023, instead of the kind of presumption of detention that most people have experienced if they find themselves in the justice system, right? The presumption that if you quote unquote break a law, or if you find yourself on the other end of law enforcement, that you will probably be locked up until you are given a money bond or until you are given a trial. Now, since the Pretrial Fairness Act has passed, we've kind of, we now have a presumption of release as opposed to a presumption of detention, if that makes sense. And so that means that we've created what's called a detention eligibility net, so that a small portion of charges are eligible for detention, right? Which doesn't mean that if that charge it lands on you that you will be detained. It just means that detention is eligible. There's a much larger kind of set of I hate using this word, but offenses, right? Charges that people can be charged with that are no longer eligible for detention. And so one of my colleagues in the coalition often says that, you know, they never thought that we would be able to say that you cannot be put into jail for a drug charge now for having drugs in this state, right? And so that is as a result of us kind of shifting this idea that you know, breaking a law means that you will be put into jail, right? What we understand that what we know is that a lot of quote unquote jailable offenses, even if you are convicted, right, those people oftentimes do not even see jail time. Oftentimes, the penalty for a lot of the crimes that people are put into jail for don't actually pre-trial don't actually result in jail time post conviction if someone is convicted, and so another kind of provision of the Pretrial Fairness Act is that it reforms the process for violations of pretrial release conditions. So before it was a felony to violate the provisions of pretrial release. So if you're released pretrial and say you're put on electronic monitoring, before it would be a felony to, like, if you needed to go to the store, for example, and you're on electronic monitoring, those penalties have been decreased because we understand that electronic monitoring is just incarceration in one's own home. And so that when we understand that we're ensuring credit and we're ensuring that people get the ability to move around on electronic monitoring, so that they can go to the grocery store, they can feed themselves, things like that. We also have reformed the warrant process, meaning that we've shifted the kind of general language around if you don't show up to court. We understand that most people who don't show up to court are dealing with life issues, right? Are dealing with barriers that may prevent them from being able to get there. They have jobs that do not allow them time off. They have children that they can't get childcare for. Most people who miss court are not willfully fleeing from prosecution or going on the run from the government. And so, as a part of the Pretrial Fairness Act, we've reformed that warrant process. So that folks who there's a distinction between failing to appear and willfully fleeing from prosecution now, and we are the first state in the union to make that distinction within our statutes. And then a big part of it also is that we've created a insurance of transparency and data collection through each different county court system in our state. Which is really important, right? Through the process of advocating for our legislation, we try to find out where is it, you know, what different locales are locking up people for what reasons, how much money is being extracted from Black and Brown communities through the money bond process, and what can we do about it, right? We understand that, unfortunately, that a lot of these smaller kind of towns are counting on money bonds and extracting that money from those communities in order to actually run their court systems, and that's unconscionable, right? We shouldn't be budgeting based on extracting resources from communities that don't have them in the first place. And so, as a result, now we will see, right? We will see what are these different counties doing, who are they locking up, why are they locking them up, what are the charges that people are receiving, and are people actually are the stakeholders actually following the new statutes? So there's a lot to our bill. There's a lot to it. It is a groundbreaking piece of legislation that has passed, and I think there will be a question part to this, but I will leave it there for now.
And stay on, because a reminder, just kind of like on the process, there's a Q&A function. You'll see a tab in the bottom. So I see folks posting their questions. If you can add them to the Q&A, when we get to the end, we have a section of time that's dedicated to the Q&A. And so Malik, I just want to, lift you up. I've met you before, but I saw you at the Black Caucus meeting where they spoke, and at that time it definitely was. We all were a bit nervous about what was possible. So I kind of want to ask you, like, what was your experience? I woke up to a post from Senator Peters at like 4 a.m. He said it was passed. So like, what was that experience like at the end? Because I know that y'all been grinding, right?
Yeah, I mean, back to the moment in September, right? Like when we had that press conference, I kind of, I was nervous to appear right at that press conference because I kind of turned around and I made eye contact with each of the legislators that stood with me, and I said, we need you all to push transformative real legislation in this session, whenever session happens. And they did that, and I was incredibly proud of them for doing that. And for standing by the provisions in the legislation that actually made it transformative. And so, big shout out to them for doing that. But yeah, it was huge. Like we did a ton of text banking and phone banking sessions through that week, right? We found out, while most of our offices were closed on December 30th, that the Illinois General Assembly would hold a lame duck veto session in early January. And so we kind of just, turned on the jets, went into just actually organizing people to put out the calls, to put out the text messages, to encourage legislators to vote the right way, to encourage the public to push their own, to push constituencies as a whole to push their legislators to vote the right way. And so, when it actually passed at the kind of last minute, it was incredible. It passed by a small margin, but it passed because it is good legislation, and that's really important to highlight. It didn't pass because it was snuck through. It didn't pass because people didn't know what was in it. No, it passed because it was good legislation. It was strong legislation, and we've given ourselves enough time to be able to implement it the right way.
Indeed. Thank you for that. And so we got questions popping off. I see them. So just hold, and Malik will be back with some answers to those questions during the Q&A. Again, I want to thank you for your leadership, and then also I know what it felt like, because we was trying to take a break, right? Like the Capitol had been, bum rushed, and there was a lot of things that were happening all at the same time, and I was like, the year just started. Like, how are we here already? And then I feel like it was a breath of fresh air. And so I'm excited to hear you answer the questions at the end. I'm gonna go forward. So we have one of the most unique pieces that took place is the prison gerrymandering piece. And I would also say my younger self, I wouldn't know what the hell that was. I was like, prison gerryman, what does it actually mean? It's huge, right? And I think that folks need to get. I invited Liliana here to kind of like express what it is, so folks can really understand the strength of this provision in the state of Illinois, and like what it will do for our folks on the ground. So I'm passing it to you, Lily. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Yeah. So if you don't know what gerrymandering is, that's okay. A lot of us don't. And there's a reason why we don't know that. So please don't feel like you should. Today is an opportunity to learn about what generally it means, and then how it's been stealing resources from different communities. Like Malik mentioned, the reliance on groups and swaths of people and removing representation. So let me first explain what gerrymandering is, and then we'll talk about prison gerrymandering. So, and I'll make it as simple as possible, because I didn't know what the heck gerrymandering was either as of 2 years ago, but I work at an organization called Change Illinois. We're nonpartisan, and a lot of our work was on redistricting efforts and making it a more transparent process at the state level. So let me just, very simple. Every 10 years, the census occurs, and those of you, I'm sure everyone on the call completed the census. You made sure that you were counted and that you said, yes, I live in the state, whether you're in Illinois. I see some folks from Missouri and from California on as well. the census occurs, we count everyone in the state, and then those numbers are used to redistrict the boundaries of our legislative districts and actually every form of government in our state. So it's a really important process. Now, what ends up happening sometimes is that legislators, what we end up seeing is partisan gerrymandering. So they'll use the numbers and they'll say, okay, this is what I want my district to look like. I want to make sure that I can cut up these communities and separate their collective power and draw my own districts. And that is what gerrymandering is. Gerrymandering means that there is a benefit, a partisan benefit to cutting up a district in a way that favors a particular party or a particular group. Now, prison gerrymandering is essentially what's been happening in Illinois, which is cutting up representation and skewing representation that unfairly ends up hurting Black and brown folks. So in Illinois specifically, we end up seeing that districts and district populations are being counted using temporary prison addresses for people who are incarcerated. So let's say I'm living temporarily in a prison downstate, but I'm from Chicago. I would be counted in the district where I'm temporarily resided in. And in the state of Illinois, folks who are incarcerated are spending on average 2 years in prisons, but they're counted for 10 years in that district. So what we end up seeing is that there are districts that are packed with inaccurate, false representation of folks. When 70% of the prison population in Illinois is made up of Black and brown residents, prison gerrymandering ends up hurting those folks the most. It really is a form of suppression and steals representation from Black and brown communities. And specifically, Black Illinoisans are disproportionately represented in the makeup of the demographic of folks who are incarcerated. So you got people who live in Chicago that end up getting sent to prisons that is not their community. They're counted in those prisons, yet they're not allowed to vote. There are no town halls in those prisons. Their legislators are not going in the prisons and saying, what can we do for you to make sure that we get your vote? It's not happening. So they get counted downstate. And so that false representation ends up skewing towards downstate districts, primarily with prisons, and away from Black and brown communities where people who are incarcerated actually live. And most of the state prisoners people who are incarcerated are Chicago residents. So part of the package, HB 3653, included the ending of prison gerrymandering. And so to give you some additional perspective, Illinois would be the 10th state to abolish prison gerrymandering. And I think it's also important to note that this hasn't been something that we've done within a year. It started with efforts from Representative LaShawn Ford, organizations like UCRO, back 10 years ago, over a decade ago, really pushing for the ending of prison gerrymandering to make sure that there is accurate representation from communities. And another thing to know is when you look at prisons and how they're built and when they're built, and prisons that were built after 1941 are about 100 miles away from Chicago. And you think about, well, why is that the case? And why are we allowed to count folks who are incarcerated temporarily for 10 years? And who does that benefit? Who does that take away representation-wise? And so we are at Change. We're so excited that the fight that happened in 2011 began in 2011. Will be included in once the governor hopefully signs the bill into law, that we will end. Illinois would be the 10th state to end prison gerrymandering. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm so happy that Illinois could be in a top 10 of anything besides corruption. Other states that have ended prison gerrymandering include Colorado, New Jersey, Nevada, Washington State, Virginia, California, Delaware, Maryland, and New York. So we're super thrilled for hopefully the governor to sign, and prison gerrymandering would end up ending in 2025. So we have some time for it to be taken into effect, but this is a movement towards true representation, ending the carceral system, and really redistributing the resources that rightfully belong in communities that these folks live in, not in districts where they're ended up getting padded. I'm going to put some links in the chat for you to refer to. We had an op-ed in the Sun-Times with, I co-wrote it with D'Angelo Bester from Worker Center for Racial Justice. I'll also provide a link for the Prison Policy Institute that explains by state what are some efforts that are doing. So depending on if you live outside of Illinois, you can see where your state stands on ending prison gerrymandering, as well as our information that you can find on our website. So I'll throw that in the chat box as well, but also allow for questions at the end. And I'm really glad that we were in this space and are able to have this conversation, and that you can learn a little bit more about ending to prison gerrymandering and what that means for our communities.
I feel like just clapping, you know what I mean? Like, part of me is just like really excited about everything that's happened, and the work that you all led. And again, I just want to highlight the importance of collaboration, right? And so for me, I mean, like, usually we're like single issue focused, and I think that what Breathe did essentially is, what does it look like? Almost like a collective bargaining agreement. Like, these are the hard lines that we're able to put together, that like we are going to stand in solidarity on. And not everything made it, right? I want to say, like, not everything made it. But what was done and what was created and what was ended is something that we should celebrate. And I know that folks may not know that this work is exhausting. This work wakes up with you. This work goes to sleep with you. This work is with you at Christmas and on every holiday. And so when you say 10 years, you know, that's a long time to be holding this work. So I just want to lift you up, and also suggest, you know, rest for all the folks that are here, so that we can recharge and refocus in 2021. So just thank you for your work and your labor. As a formerly incarcerated person, said it before, I mean, thank you, right? Allyship is extremely important in achieving some of our goals, and I think that we've achieved that together. So thank you very much for your leadership. Next up on the panel, and again, if folks have questions, I'm going to continue repeating this, just the prompt. There's a Q&A section at the bottom. You just click on that, you add your question, and we'll get to it at the close. So next up, we have the Honorable Senator Peters, that was actually in the trenches, in that room, deliberating until, I believe the post said 4 a.m. That can kind of, you know, speak to what it feels like on the inside, you know, doing this advocacy work. And he has a long history. He's been an organizer, so I think he's seen both the inside and the outside. So I wanted to introduce Senator Peters, and thank you for joining us today for this discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And you know, Malik, who literally just dropped off. I remember being part of doing this work when I was just an organizer. You know, we were an early coalition, and you know, the fact that we got this done, and it was 4:45 a.m. I remember us getting the vote done, and I'm shocked to this day and to this moment, but the reason we're here is because of the fact that people have been working, you know, to pass literally this package and pieces of this package for years. It didn't just happen out of nowhere. You know, bills and proposals have been made for half a decade, decades long. Organizing has been happening for decades long to get this done. And then what we saw this summer, I think, translated to folks in governing power, such as myself, just saying, okay, this is our moment to sort of reimagine what's possible, to undermine the idea of what we are proposing is impossible, and to say, no, this is something we can actually get done. It was dramatic. It was tense. There were folks in, the opposition was trying to negotiate and sort of divide and conquer on pieces of the package. They threw everything they could. I kind of joke. I had to give a speech on the floor in support of the bill, and I joke that, if anybody's ever seen the movie Old School, where Will Ferrell blacks out during the debate. I can't remember what I said on the floor. I was told it was good, but it was so late and I was so tired. And, there are folks who in opposition who say, oh, they passed it in the middle of the night. And honestly, I think all of us can say that we would have loved to have passed it yesteryear. We would have loved to have passed it 5 years ago. We would have loved to have done it at any time. And so, it was the fact that because opposition was being so difficult and because of the amount of negotiating that we had to do, that it took us in the morning. And sometimes when you're working on 700 pieces of legislation, and you're negotiating that and you're working that and you're in tense positions, it takes a long time to do so. What I can tell you is, we still have a long way to go, particularly the Democratic Party. I think I'm tired of people who have yard signs and thinking that's enough. I do remember in my speech on the floor that we have to move from yard signs to policy, and that's a challenge. This past summer, we saw thousands of people in the street in Naperville, in Carlinville, Illinois. We saw thousands of people in the streets in Aurora and in Joliet. So the best way to put this is that those folks are represented by white people mostly, at least in the Senate, or they were. And I think that that there's this base to see change happen that we've been told doesn't exist, and it's there. And I think that was part of the pressure point, is to say, like, it's almost like a dare, we dare you to vote against this package. We dare you to put it out there where you stand. A lot of people like to quote Dr. King, a sort of a neutral Dr. King. But I always say that there's more to that than just putting up a post or saying a quote. You actually have to act, and there needs to be action. And I think that that's what that early morning, late night sort of conversation and battle was about. And it was an issue that was pretty bipartisan, right? It was issues of pushing, Democrats and Republicans. We knew we were going to get, I'm trying not to curse so much, but a lot of shit from Republicans. And we knew that we had to bring tension to people who, they say they're Democrats and they say they support Black Lives Mattering. And in this instance, we wanted to call that to question, and we did. And, we got 32 votes in the Senate, and we got 60, which is in the House. You have to get 60 to pass a bill. We got exactly 60. And so folks know, 2 of the votes, one in the Senate, one in the House, one of the senators and one of the representatives represents the most cops in the entire state. More cops, and they have more cops in their district than anybody else. And they voted yes on this bill, to the point where I even thought you didn't need to vote yes on this bill. It was very risky, but they did. And my feeling is that we have to defend them. We have to protect them, because the FOP is going to go hard at them, because the right wing is going to come after them. But they said that this is something important to them, and they did it, and it was extremely risky. I mean, the FOP is heavy in their districts, and And so I think part of the history here is that, you know, myself and LG Sims and us as organizers are going to get, you know, we're going to talk a lot about this, but the fact that we got to the point where people who represent the police supported this legislation is, to me, historic in itself, and I will forever be grateful. I can keep talking, Richard, if you want me to keep talking.
No, I got you.
The mic.
I was typing huge in there. There's going to
Yeah.
be questions at the end as well. No, and I want to thank you for your leadership. You know, I think part of movement, one of the things, the growth in our movement has been, you know, I was part of the, you know, I was in Ferguson. I think a lot of us had, like, some of our first initial, like, engagement in, like, direct action, we learned it on the ground in Ferguson, and then was replicated around Laquan McDonald, Rekia Boyd, our fights with the FOP. I remember we've had our, you know, our direct actions at Douglas and not Douglas, at march into the FOP office, and people taking arrest, and people, you know, just been so much smoke. Let me say that.
And let me add, I think we all know the FOP, but politically speaking in Springfield, the FOP is actually maybe not as strong. You have a lot of different organizations that represent law enforcement. Mm-hmm. Some engage more open than others, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. You know, you have sheriffs, you have chiefs of police, state's attorney association. So I gotta say that there are two state's attorneys who played a vital role in helping us get this done. That was Kim Fox and Eric Reinhart. Because we were facing a lot of pressure from the state's attorney association, and they really took a risk at, honestly, at 1 a.m. It's all time between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. all feels like it was a week. I just want to make that very clear. But I think around 1 a.m. I called Sharon Mitchell with the End Money Bond Coalition. And we were negotiating a piece of language. And then we had to run it by Eric Reinhart and Kim Fox, who knew that it would be risky for them to do so. Then they had to report it back to the association, who was not necessarily the happiest about it. The fact that they were up that late with us during that to be helpful is just, I mean, Sharon, I don't think slept for like 4 days. Kim and Eric were up pretty late. It was just a lot of negotiating back and forth. There were points where, you know, having one thing be said to, you know, one Senate sponsor, another thing said to me, another thing said to Justin. We had to coordinate it all. It was you know, at a certain point, I think a moment that really stands to me and I think says a lot about our movement that I need to really sort of shout out here is, you know, oftentimes when we talk about, when we try to push something, you hear conservative members say, well, I can't do this or my people are going to kill me. You know, they'll say stuff like that. Oh, my base is going to kill me. It's a fact that at a certain point when I was negotiating, I said, I can't budge on this anymore. My people are going to kill me. Now, what that means is it says that we have the base to hold people like me accountable, and that I can say finally to more conservative folks, that's cool that you can't do this because of your base. I can't do it. I can't move either. We are stuck here. We're not negotiating further. I can't water this down. If I do that, I'm fucked. I apologize, everybody. And I think that's like the key here is that we have to get more people from our, you know, sort of our organizing in positions of governing power, because it creates that, and then they need to truly come from us for the accountability. I come out of organizing. I will see myself as an organizer first, state senator second. and always see myself in that position. And I will always say that if I'm doing what's right and it pushes me, and I do believe you have to be strategic. Don't be a martyr to make yourself feel good, right? Building long-term governing power for the masses is not about martyrdom. There's only one martyr I tend to think about, and that's Jesus Christ, and will never be Jesus Christ, right? So there's not us to be that martyr. Our job, though, is to be held accountable to our base at the same time. So being strategic, coming from the movement, having the accountability, knowing that even after you get something done, you celebrate your victories, you have to celebrate it, and you, for people who otherwise are taking a risk, that you also look out for them. So I will say, like, some of these folks who represent conservative areas, I will have their back, and I will say, what do you need to know that you can be able to take this vote again in the future? And I think that's the important part of what it means to have a movement move into governing power. And I think it's just something for us to learn from. And the other part is the important part of knowing that when you organize and you build, it cannot be in a silo. Like we organize in Chicago pretty well. Of course, we'll all say we need to do better and do more. But you need to Illinois is a complicated state. It's a beautiful state, but it's complicated. People downstate might have their favorite baseball team is the Cardinals, right? So they relate to the St. Louis Cardinals more than they do to the Chicago White Sox or the Cubs, right? So that alone, just looking at baseball, tells you how they relate as a people. They relate closer to their southern neighbors than they do to Chicago, which means that you need to organize people in, not just in Metro East, but in, Sangamon County, where Springfield is, McLean, Champaign-Urbana, even up north in Rockford, right? Like, we need to think about how are we building a mass movement that, to be honest with you, is difficult. There are people who have different, sense of selves in, southern and central Illinois than they do in Chicago or Cook or even, DuPage in Chicago, right? And I think that part of us getting this done is the fact that there was organizing happening around this package across the state from different points of view in terms of where they live and their experiences, but a shared sense of what we need to get done for, as I would put it, safety for all in Illinois and for themselves. And so, I'm just rambling and just saying I feel like
good. This is good. I think, just one week, we also want to leave some time for question and answer. I just want to say that the growth of our movement and like the ability, the humility of our movement to say, since like the direct actions and all of that, oh no, we need elected officials, right? And so we get, and so we need to get in the House and be able to make and change policy. We need to get, I think that we're growing as a movement. And I think the acknowledgement of like, we need downstate support is a new growth, right? That we can't just talk. And I think one of the things that Alonzo was excited about is that we're taking a bus tour called like the Underground Economy, a bus tour all the way downstate to make connections between us and East St. Louis. Like, what's going on? You know what I'm saying? Like, we are in the same conditions, right? And we got to connect, right? And so a lot of our folks got displaced, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of folks are in Joliet, right? And so Alonzo, our lead, is like, we got to be in Joliet. So we in Joliet now, and so that then opens us up to Will County. And like, we got to continue to do this work and be humble and learn in the process. And so thank you for your leadership. Next, we have another person who was who has made that that shift, and who is one of the thought leaders within our movement, and also represents the movement for Black Lives, who's gonna help us define like what's next, like what do we got to do next, right? Like we won some things, we lost some things, we are exhausted, we do need to repair, but we need a North Star moving forward. So I'm going to pass it to Amara Enya, who is going to give us a message about looking forward, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich, for facilitating this conversation. I also want to thank all of the panelists for just sharing, for their commitment to this work. This is a huge win, and I don't think that it should be understated or underestimated, the implications of what this means for Illinois. And just as you've mentioned at the beginning of this teaching, it really has been years in the making. And it's a testament to the strength and the commitment of the coalitions that all came together to make this happen. So I definitely just want to support and lift up all of the hard work that it's taken to get us to this point. And so I only have a few things to add to the conversation. A lot has been shared about the process, about some of the provisions in the legislation, and folks will be able to get additional information after the teach-in. But really just to sort of put all of this in context from a national level, as well as a local level. So this work that we're doing is really part of a national agenda. And I think the movement for Black Lives has been really intentional about saying that we have to operate at both levels, both the national and the local level. The invest divest framework is something that I want to call out, especially for this teaching, so that we can begin to get more comfortable with what that means and why this is so pivotal to being able to move this work in a way that will have long-lasting impact. And that's because typically when we look at conversations around criminal justice reform or just divesting from the carceral state, a lot of the focus tends to be on the specifics of policing. So it does cover issues of how police do their jobs, police abuse. We talked about cash bail earlier, so the ways in which people are incarcerated or people are held, they're losing their freedoms because of a lot of the injustices in the system. And that's all very critical. But the component that does not often get as much attention and actually has implications that get to the roots of the police system or the carceral state is about investment. It is about what our communities require so that people can be free and can live freely. And so those things have everything to do with the quality of our education system. They have everything to do with the ability for people to have access to the things that they need in their communities, whether it's adequate food, safety, free from violence, the economy, that's a huge component of this. These are the things that actually build strong individuals and strong communities. And so when we're talking about this, even this legislation that's passed and the work moving forward, part of the challenge across the country is to help people and elected officials included in that to really think differently about what it means when we talk about safety and what it means for people to live freely, that it's not just what we do around policing. Yes, that's important, but it's also about how we invest in our communities. How do people get to access the resources that they need so that they can live to their fullest potential? And that's a key part of the investment, part of the Invest Divest framework that characterizes the BREATHE Act and what we were hoping to really push in Illinois, because we, even as legislators, and Senator Peters can tell you, we can't assume that all of our legislators, all of our elected officials just get it or just understand. There's a lot of educating, a lot of handholding, a lot of mind shifting that has to take place to adopt the framework that we have so that they can then more comfortably push the policies that we need them to push on our behalf. And so that's just the context that this work the work is housed in. But also just thinking about nationally, there are conversations that have happened, I know, with the Movement for Black Lives to really make sure that this legislation, the BREATHE Act, is a large part of the new administration, conversations that are happening in the new administration, and our goal really to influence policy with the new administration. Now, we understand that this is a different landscape from our previous president, but that doesn't lessen the need for us to be very clear about the principles of the BREATHE Act, what our aims are, and making sure that this legislation is front and center of the new administration's agenda. So those conversations are happening, meetings with the transition team are happening, because even though we've had this victory in Illinois, our goal is this has to be across the country. And we're not assuming that just because we have a new administration that these things will be automatically accepted or automatically put into place at the national level. So M4BL is definitely involved in those conversations and really wanting to take the feedback and the learning that we're getting from these different states to make sure that we can push this to be a top agenda item for the new administration. So that's what's happening at the national level. Also, there are other states who are interested in coming on board, and I was reviewing the chat throughout the conversation, and I noticed that there are folks from California, folks from Texas, and so the good news is that the goal is to replicate what is happening and what's happened in Illinois across the country. And so we are involved in New York State, we are involved in California, in Texas, North Carolina. And so I would just encourage folks to, you can check out m4bl.org to get a better sense of the other places that we're organizing. But also if you are in one of those states and you want to either support or join or help form a coalition similar to what Illinois has been able to build, then you can definitely reach out to us so that we can help to plug people in, connect people, because again, the goal is to form coalitions. We know that there are folks on ground throughout the country who have been working on these issues, and part of what we would like is to connect the dots. So in your state, we want to connect the dots so that you can build a strong coalition that can really work to push this legislation at the state level. So that's a little bit of what's happening at the national level. That is the approach at the state level. We, again, just so that people are clear, a lot of what was passed in Illinois, it's not gonna happen tomorrow. There are timelines for some of the provisions. And so the goal for us is to provide additional opportunities for webinars, for teach-ins. I know some of the coalition organizations have events planned to share more of the granular details about what's in the legislation so that we can make sure that our people are properly prepared and can move accordingly. So that is definitely going to happen over the coming months. We do encourage folks to support the organizations in the coalition, also to support and speak up in thanking the elected officials who did do what we needed them to do. I'm probably one of the strongest critics of elected officials, but the goal is when they do what we need them to do, we should have their back so that they can continue to do more of what we need them to do. And so it's important that we acknowledge the elected officials that decided to actually be bold and actually do some things that the communities across the state have been calling for years. So that's just a little bit of what's happening at the national level, what the next few months will look like. And so hopefully if there are questions, we'll be able to respond and hopefully get people the information that they need.
Thank you, Dr. Amara. And it's been a pleasure working with you. One of the things that I think folks may have to recognize, well, I'll just lean into it, is that we have to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? As it relates to the divest piece, there was a national curiosity around divestment. When it came to the development of alternatives, right? I think we had to do that in the midst of creating these campaigns to dismantle, right? So what that looks like at EAT is the mutual aid work and the BREATHE Act, right? What that looks at EAT is the Guaranteed Income Pilot Project that we're trying to launch, right? And the BREATHE Act, because we're not saying that we want to, it's not just about dismantling, it's about what are we trying to rebuild. And I think that collectively we have a vision for not just Black resistance, but Black advancement, right? Like we don't want to just resist the current circumstances. We also have to vision a world that we want to live in. And then also, I think what we're learning is that vision has to be constructed by us also, right? Like we can't lean on the elected officials to define that. So I think one of the best things about the BREATHE Act is that we're able to actually draft out the language, right? Which is a new muscle within movement, and then also on the federal level, this is a new muscle within movement. We're reading policies. This isn't it. This isn't what we're talking about. We have to construct what we're talking about, right? In the real world. And I think that, your leadership and the work that you're doing in the economy, around the economy, it is light years ahead, but we are in the process of building it. So thank you for, your leadership in the state. We need you here, and you are our mayor. For folks that don't know. So that's I'm gonna leave that there. So we're gonna open it up for Q&A. We have a number of questions in the chat. So please, if some questions are already answered, thank y'all for leaning into that process, because we really want to make sure that folks leave this call with clarity. the first question is by Diana. I can't pronounce your last name, so I won't attempt. But how much pushback did your group encounter from the state level? And so the folks that were on the panel, I know that Malik jumped off, but the folks that were on the panel, if you can come back on camera, that'd be great. How much pushback did your group encounter from the state level police unions or other police associations? What tactics did you see used by those groups? And I don't know if you want us to answer that historically or just like within the last moment, right? Because this, like for some folks, this has been 10 years going. I know that we have organized direct actions towards some of the folks that were in opposition, and they were brutal, right? And so I think I'll pose that to the panel, and you all can answer with whatever lineage you want to speak from.
Lily, I'm gonna just go. I was like, I don't know who's in. I'll say, I mean, it wasn't necessarily just the police unions, because again, it's complicated with the FOP. You know, you have two FOPs. You have a statewide FOP, and then you have the FOP Lodge 7, which people, I mean, with their president, nobody's listening to really that much to FOP Lodge 7. But broader in terms of opposition from law enforcement, I mean, I don't think we wanted to pass a bill at 445. That gives you an idea of how much pushback we got. I also think, to be honest with you, a lot of law enforcement and opposition did not expect us to actually be able to get this done. So I think, in all honesty, they kind of, you know, we had 9 hearings. We did 30 hours of hearings. And they didn't really do that much in terms of, you know, lobbying against, you know, whatever they heard from these hearings and everything like that. So in terms of the bill, and then all of a sudden they realized, as the Black Caucus pillars were moving. So, you know, as we got education done, and then in the House, the economic pillar was moving, and it was clear the health, they were like, oh, people are going to vote for the Black Caucus pillars. Like, we've got to step up. And so as we came into Springfield, panic set in. I mean, law enforcement went full on panic mode. So, you know, they put out a thing about 15 principles, but they didn't really clearly identify it. So technically, there are 15 principles for criminal justice reform, as they put it. Well, what we say is, we did your 15 principles because you didn't really say what you wanted. And yeah, we accomplished those principles, like you said. And they try to do all these op-eds. And so if you look at how they're responding, I mean, like, they did not take us so seriously at all, to the point when they were attacking parts of the bill. They started talking on behalf of domestic violence survivors and sexual assault survivors. And then we dropped the idea that, you know, especially with ending cash bond, it was supported by domestic violence survivors and sexual assault survivors. And basically we're like, they're just so caught off guard that they were relying on old talking points and so disorganized. And so, yeah, I mean, they tried their hardest, but, you know, at first they didn't take us seriously. And here we are. Now, what I will tell you is, because they didn't take us seriously, now they're going to take us very seriously. And they're going to throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. Their messaging, to be honest with you, I think at first was frightening, but they really don't know what they're talking about. And the other part is, one thing that I think for us as both advocates and as legislators and policy folks is, we can't lose sight that at the end of the day, what we are talking about is public safety. We are talking about people's well-being. We are talking about people's safety. And so if the judgment is the last 40 years of who's been keeping people safe, the opponents are the only people who can continue not to keep us safe and say it's someone else's fault. And it seems like that's okay. That's common. You don't see that in any other job, in any other place. So my usual joke is, only the Bears seem to get away more often with putting the same thing every year and getting away with it. Nobody else gets that except the Bears and law enforcement. And so here we are saying, okay, your 40 years of doing things hasn't worked. You've said it doesn't work, because we see every Monday you have a press conference about how it isn't working. So we have a plan, and we're putting it together. And so what we did in Springfield was not the end of something, it was the start of something. It was the start of public safety for everybody. And it's not going to be blue lights and closed circuit television watching a corner. It's going to be food on a table, a good school, a good job, an invested neighborhood, and looking out for each other. So
thank you for that. Okay, so I'm gonna do this because we're gonna do it rapid fire because I wanna respect y'all's time. We have about 4 questions. I'm gonna read them all off, and then we can everybody kind of go around and give like our last round comments, you know, and hit the points that we brought up on in the Q&A. And for folks that don't get your answer resolved via the Q&A, feel free to shoot us an email and we can set up a time to have a one-to-one. Those are also possibilities here. From Michael, how does HB 30, you don't have to answer right away. I'm gonna go through all 4 of them. How does HB 3653 have language to prevent discriminatory decisions from being made when non-cash bail is implemented? That may be a question for Malik. Anonymous attendee, I live in New York. What is next for our state? Whom do I need to contact? Thanks. I'm pretty sure Mark can direct you straight to that group. Any advice for voters in the red state?
I can answer the first question real quick about discrimination. So just real quick, the bail part, the Pretrial Fairness Act limits the use of risk assessment algorithm tools. You know, there's still risk assessment, but without it having to be algorithmic because it's baked in biases, and limits, sort of the abuse of electronic monitoring for pretrial incarceration. So we try not to end, the idea is sort of restoring the presumption of innocence for folks. So we try to reduce as much bias as possible. I mean, we can't, until we've completely gotten rid of systemic racism, we can't say that it's gone, but we try to reduce that, particularly with algorithms in terms of risk assessments, because as we know, risk assessment tools have a bunch of baked-in biases that are just absolutely unfair. So I just want to answer that real quick for folks.
Well, thank you for that. Another one piece, any advice for voters in red states like Florida? I can connect you with folks in Florida doing the work too. So I'll answer a little bit about that. Any advice for non-profit bail fund organizations in Minneapolis facing backlash, advocacy, abolition tips? Okay, so those are the questions. You all got them. We can do it popcorn style, or I can call off folks, but Amar, come on.
Yeah, no, I respectfully bow out because you guys are the ones, and I wish Malik was on as well to provide a tip. So I apologize to not be able to provide answers, but I think Dr. Enyep could provide answers.
Yes, me too.
Sure. So I just dropped a link in the chat for anyone in other states, and this is for the New York question about who to connect with and how you can get involved. So that form, you can complete it. It actually comes to us, and because we have at the back end, we're working with different organizations on ground in some of these other states, it helps us to connect folks who can be a part of the coalition. So you can definitely fill that out. It comes directly to us, and then we'll actually just get back in touch and then connect you with other folks in the state. So that was to the New York question. To the other question about red states, just supporting, yes, we have folks in red states, and we're actually pretty intentional about not just limiting our efforts to blue states or to Democratic states. There's a lot of opportunities for growth and for moving the needle in red states. So we do have folks down in Texas right now, in North Carolina, which I don't know if it's red or purple or what it is after the election, but we have folks down in North Carolina. So we're not shying away from Republican states or red-leaning states. So don't be hesitant to say we want to start a coalition or we want to do this work because of the Democratic or Republican leanings of the state that you're located in. There was a couple other questions. Any advice for a nonprofit bail fund organization in Minneapolis is facing backlash? We definitely have folks in Minneapolis. And Rich, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but again, a lot of this is about connecting with each other, like knowing and understanding that the issues that you're facing, especially from an advocacy standpoint, that there are allies, and sometimes it's not that they're not there, it's just we have to connect the dots with each other. And so I know we have folks in Minneapolis right now that are doing some amazing work on ground and have been doing amazing work on ground. So it might just be us helping to make those connections there.
Yeah, I can follow up. And so you can email me directly. I'll post my email in the chat, and we can connect you with both Candace and Misky, two folks from, I can't remember, I think it's like Black Visions Collective.
Black Visions Collective, yep.
And their ministry, and they have a very, very, very robust policy in motion in Minneapolis. And you all should, I mean, I think that when it comes to that, I mean, it comes back to the humility part, right? It's not about, it's like, what can we do together? Which is what happened in Illinois, which is like relationship building, and also just getting there and saying, how can I help? So I can connect you with Misky and Candace and the Black Visions Collective, or you can just look up the Black Visions Collective in Minnesota. As it relates to Florida, there's a lot of great groups doing work, and I'm gonna highlight one organization and one individual who also has an organization I don't know the name of. One is the Dream Defenders, that are doing astounding work in Florida, and they have chapters all throughout Florida. Another formation that has a base in Florida is Black Men Build, which is a formation that's in relationship to our movement. And then Desmond Meade, who organizes formerly incarcerated folks. Those are the folks that turn the vote, so that formerly incarcerated people could vote in Florida, which essentially can turn, I mean, this is monumental. It can turn Florida blue, right? And then right after he passed this, he was on the cover of Time magazine. They went right back into their policy thing. I don't know what to call it. And they created a whole host of provisions to rebox those same folks out, right? So when people often say that like voting isn't a radical act, if it wasn't radical, they wouldn't go through as much work as they do to prevent us from being able to do it. I think one of the through lines throughout this conversation is democracy. And what we say at Equity and Transformation around democracy is essentially this. If a decision is made that impacts your life, right? And a lot of times we got to do the research to find out what decisions are being made. You have a right to play a role in how the decision is made. We're extremely lucky in the state of Illinois that everyone essentially has the right to vote. I think, even formerly incarcerated people have the right to vote here, right? Well, there's still work that we got to do to make sure that all of us at the end of the day have the right to vote. But through our vote, we can get in to Senator Peters. We can get Amara Ann if she runs again, right? We can get our folks in office, and getting one person in is not enough, right? Because as you know, democracy means the majority of people you have to move to your line. And that's also part of the impetus of equity and transformation. Like, we cannot take on campaigns where the majority of our people are not in alignment with it. So that means that we got to win our people to our line. We have to win, and then that line has to be parakeeted by the legislators that we put in office. And like Senator Peters said, then they are accountable to that base, right? So this was a practice in that, right? Educating our community, our allies, etc. on this is why we took up this cause. These are the legislators that were champions on this cause, and these are the legislators that we hold accountable. And then also information on, like, I didn't know downstate folks were supporting it like that. How do we get information with them and support them, right? What type of education needs to happen in their community so that they understand the issues of folks in the city of Chicago, right? And I think that builds a really robust state that can do some dramatic shifts and create and advance that robust Black future. So I want to close that because I want to give y'all time back. It's Saturday morning. It's 11 here. I don't know what time it is there. But we really thank y'all for joining us this morning. And Amara, thank you, Liliana, all the panelists, Senator Peters. Shout out. That's huge that you made it. And I appreciate you being here. Malik, who had to jump off early. Just thank you all for spending your morning with us, and y'all have a good day. Peace and chicken grease. All right, y'all. Be good.